Recently, South Korea has become the focus of the world's attention. Why? This is because, right at the end of the G7 summit on May 21st, the Chinese Communist authorities announced a ban on products from Micron, a U.S. memory chip maker, citing national security risks. Micron Technology is the world's third largest memory chip maker after South Korea's Samsung and SK Hynix. In the last episode, we covered the story of this matter and concluded that the Chinese Communist Party, CCP's move, was intended to use Micron's vacated market in China to drive a wedge between the U.S. and its allies, and put the U.S.-led coalition against the CCP to the test. For example, offer the vacated share of Micron in the memory chip market to South Korea's Samsung or SK Hynix as a lure. On May 23rd, the Financial Times reported that the White House has asked the South Korean government to urge South Korean chip makers not to fill any gap in the Chinese chip market regarding the CCP's ban on Micron's chips in China. Being the main target of the CCP's alienation, South Korea's attitude has received attention from all walks of life. Why is South Korea's decision such a concern? South Korea is a unique country in this region of Northeast Asia. Taking Seoul, South Korea as the center, a plane can fly a half-hour radius and draw a circle. It covers these national capitals: Beijing, Pyongyang, Tokyo, and Taipei in Taiwan. In other words, all the most important countries in Northeast Asia are included in it. So although South Korea is a small country itself, its attitude toward the CCP, which side it chooses in the confrontation between China and the United States, is a significant issue that will determine the fate of a nation. For a long time in the past, South Korea was dependent on mainland China in terms of economic interests, which weakened the alliance between South Korea and the United States as a result. Let's take trade as an example. On an annual basis, South Korea's trade with China was over $55 billion in 2018. Topping all other countries in terms of surplus size, ranking second with a surplus of close to $29 billion in 2019, and third with over $23 billion in 2020 and over $24 billion in 2021. South Korea's trade surplus with China is the largest source of its foreign trade surplus. However, this surplus has gradually decreased since 2018. Due to the economic concern, the two previous South Korean presidents tried to maintain a balance between China and the United States. For example, when Park Geun-hye became president, she signed a free trade and investment agreement with China in 2015 and agreed to allow the U.S. to deploy the THAAD system in South Korea in 2017. But the CCP couldn't accept that. It drove a nationwide wave of anti-Korean protests, boycotting South Korean singers and film products, and created a national boycott of Korean companies and products, all of which took place in 2017. After Moon Jae-in became president, he reached a private concession with the CCP with a 3-no policy. That is, not to join the Japan-US military alliance, not to upgrade the THAAD system, and not to participate in a military alliance against the CCP. It warmed up China-South Korean relations, but US-South Korea relations cooled dramatically. In particular, the Japan-South Korea relations basically dropped to a freezing point. However, the new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, elected in 2022, has been committed to strengthening the ROK-US alliance since his first year in office. On April 26, he visited the U.S. to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the U.S.-South Korea alliance. At the White House, the two countries made a joint announcement of the Washington Declaration, a landmark agreement to strengthen cooperation on all fronts. The U.S. made an unprecedented commitment to deploy Ohio-class strategic nuclear submarines to South Korea. In his remarks on the White House lawn, Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said attempts to alter the status quo by force, supply chain fragmentation and disruption, challenges in food and energy security are threatening global peace and stability. At the state dinner, both parties interacted in a friendly manner. Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol sang the song American Pie on the spot and received a standing ovation.
So please join me to our partnership, to our people, to possibilities, and to the future of the Republic of Korea and the United States will create together. May we do it together for another 170 years.
한미동맹은 양국의 안전과
The alliance will not only ensure the security and prosperity of both countries, but also contribute to the peace and security in the Indo-Pacific and of the world. And those of you joining us here today are the main drivers for building such an alliance. There's an old saying, and Mr. President, this one is also Irish, that goes, a good friend is like a four-leaf clover, hard to find and lucky to have.
그것은 행운이다라는 속담이 있습니다. 우리의 강철 같은 동맹을 위하여
to our ironclad alliance.
In fact, by 2022, South Korea's trade surplus with China dropped sharply to a little over $1 billion. In reality, starting in May 2022, South Korea's multi-year trade surplus with China has turned into a deficit. This was mainly due to the dynamic zero-COVID policy and city lockdowns in China during the epidemic, which slowed down economic growth and led to a decrease in South Korea's exports to China and a sharp increase in imports from China due to higher prices of industrial raw materials such as lithium. Beijing's ban on Micron has undoubtedly put South Korea in the middle of a US-China battle over technology access and national security. So how will South Korea react? Can South Korea withstand the test of interest when Beijing dangles a carrot in front of it? On May 27th, Bloomberg quoted a source familiar with the situation as saying that South Korea would avoid capitalizing on Beijing's ban on U.S. chipmakers without filling the gap in the Chinese market due to the ban. It also said Beijing's move was an attempt to create a divide between South Korea and the U.S. The person, who asked to remain anonymous, said the South Korean government would not encourage domestic memory chip companies to seize the market share lost by Micron in China. He added that South Korea is also staying alert to taking advantage of Micron to capture the market because it sees the United States as an important long-term partner in its semiconductor industry, and they don't want to damage that relationship. China is the largest market for South Korean semiconductor companies, Samsung Electronics Co. and SK Hynix Corp., and is home to some of their factories. Currently, the U.S., along with allies such as Japan and the Netherlands, has imposed a series of export controls on Beijing's chip-making equipment and technology. Japan, Taiwan, and the Netherlands are all key players in the U.S. plan to restructure the high-tech supply chain, and the one gap in the middle has always been South Korea. The largest items in South Korea's trade with mainland China and the main source of South Korea's trade surplus are all related to semiconductors and advanced electronics technology, including various products from Samsung Electronics. On the issue of the CCP's ban on Micron chips, despite the temptation faced by relevant Korean companies, South Korea doesn't have much choice. The continued operation of Korean factories in China also depends on the license issued by Washington. South Korea's advanced semiconductor products, with technology mainly coming from the U.S. and raw materials from Japan, are tantamount to being isolated from the U.S. supply chain. If they don't follow in the footsteps of the U.S., it would be fatal to the future development of the Korean economy. Therefore, sooner or later, South Korea must follow the direction of the U.S. It's just that for a long time, the tight economic ties with China made South Korea a constant variable in the U.S.-China confrontation. This agreement between the U.S. and South Korea, coupled with the current South Korean stance on the Micron chip ban, indicates that South Korea has officially chosen to side with the U.S. In addition to the above-mentioned factors, there is another important reason for South Korea's steadfast U-turn against the CCP. That is the threat of war. South Korea was not very vocal about the Taiwan Strait issue before. During this visit to the U.S., in a rare move, South Korean President Yoon suggested that he wanted stability in the Taiwan Strait and did not want unilateral changes. This upset the CCP. Before he left for the U.S., he had already made a speech in South Korea saying that the Taiwan Strait was not a national matter, but an international one. It made the Chinese Foreign Ministry very unhappy. There is a view that holds that South Korea's aiding with the United States is inevitable. The practice of relying on China for economic development and the United States for security is not only seen in Asia, but also in Africa and Latin America and elsewhere. When a country develops its economy and wants some countries to invest in its construction, it goes to China. But if there is any internal conflict, a military coup, or a fight between two countries, then they have to count on the U.S., and China is definitely not going to work at times like this. This is like an individual in society. He wants to do business and get rich. He can partner with whomever he wants, but when he runs into trouble or danger, he goes to the police. Whether he likes it or not, or even if he complains about the police, he still goes to the police. South Korea is notable in this regard because its economy is greatly dependent on foreign trade, on its exports. During China's high-growth era, the degree of South Korea's economic dependence on mainland China is rather high, more so than that of other countries. But when the world becomes insecure and in crisis, it also needs to go to the police. Now, as the conflict in Asia is getting worse, especially the crisis in the Taiwan Strait, the world can feel the danger of war is getting closer than ever. Once the CCP uses military power to attack Taiwan, the global economy will be greatly affected for sure, and no one can stay intact away from it. South Korea will definitely be the first to bear the impact. At this critical moment, if South Korea doesn't opt for the US side, it would face a major or lethal risk in the event of a conflict. As soon as the news was announced that the US and South Korea signed the Washington Declaration, the first reaction was not from North Korea, but from the Chinese Communist Party. On April 28th, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement declaring its strong opposition to the proposed U.S. nuclear submarine docking in South Korea and strong dissatisfaction with South Korea, especially in response to the U.S.-South Korea joint statement on the need for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
上述举动对缓和半岛形势没有任何注意，只会加剧军备竞赛，破坏核不扩散体系，破坏地区的和平稳定。
Department of Asian Affairs Director General Liu Jin-song met with South Korean Embassy Minister Kang Sang-wook in Beijing on the night of April 27th to urge South Korea to strictly adhere to the One China principle. So why did the CCP react so strongly? On the surface, both the US and South Korea said they responded to North Korea's nuclear threat because North Korea has tested its nuclear weapons 6 times. But a number of military experts have said explicitly that this deployment of nuclear submarines should actually point to something else, namely the CCP. The ability of nuclear submarines to strike from thousands of kilometers away would have implications for the entire strategic landscape of Asia. Outsiders have also noticed that the relationship between South Korea and Japan is rapidly improving amidst the changing overall environment.
양국은 북핵 위협에 함께
Both countries are exposed to North Korea's nuclear threats. Security cooperation is more important now than ever before.
이 워싱턴 선언은
The Washington Declaration is based on an agreement between South Korea and the United States, but we do not exclude the participation of Japan.
그렇지만 일본의 참여를 배제하지는 않습니다.
日韓関係は様々な
Between Japan and South Korea, there are numerous historical aspects and circumstances. As the Prime Minister of Japan, I think that it is my duty to ensure we carry on with the efforts of those before us who overcame difficult times and work together with President Yoon in the Korean side.
私の責務であると考えております。日米同盟
In accordance with the Japan-US alliance, the South Korean-US alliance, Japan-South Korea, and the security cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the US, we once again agreed on the importance of strengthening deterrence and the ability to cope with situations. Relations between South Korea and Japan, which are both US allies, have been strained in the past for historical reasons. The two countries have differences on issues related to Japan's colonial rule on the Korean Peninsula before and after World War II, such as disputes over Japanese companies' wartime recruitment of workers. Japan revoked South Korea's trade preference status in August 2019, and South Korea did the same the following month. On April 24, 2023, South Korea resumed Japan's trade status. A few days later, Japan also relisted South Korea as a priority trading partner. The Biden administration has always expressed concern about the restoration of relations between Japan and South Korea. A stronger alliance between Japan and South Korea is of great strategic importance to the United States. The threat of nuclear weapons from North Korea is a headache for both Japan and South Korea. Due to its geographical location, if a war across the Taiwan Strait breaks out, Japan will face serious security threats. The South Korean military has always had a good relationship with the United States. Now that the relationship with Japan has improved, it may interact with the Japanese military in the future. After that, the radiation of South Korean military power may reach the Taiwan Strait. In the military rankings in Asia, South Korea is now ahead of Japan. Japan has been subject to some restrictions because of the peace constitution after World War II, while South Korea has developed a lot of armaments. If South Korea is willing to interact with the Americans, such as using the 5th clause of the South Korea-U.S. Military Alliance Treaty, that is, when one side is attacked, the other side is regarded as an attack on both sides at the same time, the South Korean army can justifiably provide assistance. That is to say, on the issue of the Taiwan Strait, South Korea has also joined in or provided some degree of support. The straight line distance from South Korea to Beijing is 600 miles, and the F-16 fighter jet can fly there in about 20 minutes. Beijing is well aware of this threat. These are some factors that will have a fundamental impact on the overall situation across the Taiwan Strait. Therefore, South Korea's shift actually has a great impact on the entire Southeast Asia, including the situation in the Taiwan Strait. Of course, given the long-term close economic and trade exchanges between South Korea and China, as well as the CCP's deliberate infiltration of all levels of South Korean political circles, the future between the US, South Korea, and the CCP will not be simple. Today, within South Korea, there are also debates on how to handle relations with China and the US. For example, it has been suggested that a tightrope walk between the US and China might be in South Korea's interest. However, Unification Minister Kwang Young-seo, a close friend of the South Korean president, disagrees with this idea. On May 19, 2023, Kwang Young-seo used the analogy of the story of the bat in Aesop's Fables to warn that if one walks a tightrope between the US and China, with ambiguous attitudes and swaying from side to side, one will eventually be abandoned by both sides and will not end up well. Kwang Young-seo stressed that for an international community as troubled as the recent one, it is necessary for South Korea to make clear the axis of the Korea-US alliance before improving relations with China.